Good morning, Endeavour! And we've made it to Friday! Brilliant. Well, this week with our class novel has certainly been heart-pounding, hasn't it? And we're going to finish today with two more extracts, and the first is called Another Kind of Exploring. The field they landed it on was a large one. The explorer said they'd need to land before, didn't he? Used for cattle grazing. It was long and as green as the Amazon. They bumped painfully and rose and thumped down again. The cows bellowed in terror and scattered. The front wheel shook. The back wheel bucked. There was a moment when it felt as if they would flip wing over tip, but the plane shuddered and roared and stilled. The cows never fully recovered. For the rest of his life, Fred would feel gratitude when he smelt freshly mown grass. The rest of it was a blur. Fred and Con burnt the plane by dropping a lighted branch into the engine, Lila standing well back with Max in her arms. They sat in the grass watching the yellow wings turn red and waited. Before long the fire attracted a crowd. There were hordes of people shouting in languages Fred didn't know, with Lila attempting to interpret. Then a journey by horse to a family with a motor launch, doctors, the boat ride, Manias, a hospital for Max, telegrams, telephone calls, a man and a woman tiptoeing into a hospital room and gathering Max and Lila so tightly in their arms they gasped for breath. And then a huge ocean liner with a gold-walled dining room and a steak and ice cream and a piano that Lila played, hesitantly, beautifully seated between her two parents with Bacca around her neck, while Con and Max leapt in circles around the mirrored ballroom, scandalising the other passengers. Fred sat with his knees tucked up on one of the silk-backed chairs and watched them. He tried to speak sternly to his body, but whenever he thought of his father's fingertips and knees began to quiver with nerves and hope. Don't, he told himself, don't. It's an office day. He'll have to work. He'll send the housekeeper. Each day the air grew cooler. Every hour the smell of the sea changed from green to blue. And then, before he had time to set his thoughts into straight lines, to brush the green of the Amazon from his heart, the ship was heading towards the dock. A row of people stood by the waterside, their fists tight, their eyes vivid with tension and longing. Fred raked them for a familiar face. The crew lowered the gangplank and Lila and Max let out a cry. Their grandmother stood at the barrier, her arms stretching out towards the ship. The two of them hurtled down the gangplank and were swept up in her embrace. Their parents followed, laughing. The old woman had the same wicked tilt to her eyebrows as Max. "Con!" called a voice. Con turned and her face flashed suddenly a light. Fred turned in time to see a great aunt standing upright and gaunt, shaking with emotion as she watched her great niece descend the gangplank. Fred saw Con's aunt reach out and take hold of her wrist. She held it in both hands to make sure it was Con and was real. Fred followed at a distance. Nobody called his name. He stood still in the bustle of the customer's shed, looking out towards the ship. He tried to still the roar of disappointment in his chest. And then suddenly Fred saw his father. His suit crumpled beyond recognition, his coat-tails flying, running towards him, pushing aside sailors and women in elaborate hats, flying faster than any aeroplane. "I thought I'd lost you," he said. He pulled him so close Fred felt his ribs creak next to his heart. "I could not have borne it. I could not." Fred buried his face hard in his father's coat. He thought of the man alone again, striding out through the jungle. He could almost hear his voice. Every human on this earth is an explorer. Sometimes exploring is a word for walking out into the unknown. And sometimes it's a word for coming home. 12 years later. Fred pushed open the door to the Ritz and strode towards the tea rooms as fast as he could go without running. He ignored the excited whispers from a crowd of boys following him along the foyer. Max jumped up when he saw Fred coming and knocked over the sugar bowl. He was tall now, as tall as Fred, and his face no longer had its baby roundness, but his eyebrows still pointed upwards at the ends. "You came! We thought you might still be on expedition." He embraced Fred, crushing him hard around the arms. "Fred!" Lila had grown so beautiful that Fred always hesitated each time they met, feeling oddly embarrassed until she grinned at him. Her wonky tooth, slightly wonkier now, was still there. She gave him a bear hug. "How's your trip? You've been in all the papers. A new kind of explorer, they say." Before he could answer, a voice came from behind them. "You all look so smart," it said. "You should have told me. I would have worn my ruffles." "Con," said Max. At first glance, Con looked very like she'd done the first thing in the morning at the airfield, still with a jutting jaw, still at right angles to herself, but the blonde curls were gone, as was the expression of distrust. She wore her hair in a bob, high-waisted trousers and a felt hat that looked like a pith helmet. The hat had in fact been a Christmas present from Fred the year before. Fred's father still called the upstairs spare bedroom Con's room. A waitress approached with an armful of menus. "Thank you," said Con, "but we decided what to have a long time ago." "Could we have one of every cake on the menu?" asked Fred. "And 4 hot chocolates," said Max. He grinned. "In honour of the grub pancakes." As soon as the waitress had gone, Lila reached under the table. "I brought someone to celebrate with us. He's very, very old. The waitress might not like it, though. Can you make a barrier with your coats?" She lifted a bundle of grey fur from the wicker basket by her side, and very slowly it opened its eyes. "Backer," said Fred. "He's enormous," said Con. "He's a very respectable old man these days," said Lila, "but he used to be such a terror." "A very slow-motion terror," said Max. "He kept trying to eat the covers of my biology textbooks." They passed Backer from hand to hand. His fur was less fluffy and he moved creakily, but his eyes were shining black and his nose still inquisitive. He raised one slow arm and scooped a lump of brown sugar towards him. Then Fred held out a palm of his hand. It was faint now, the mark you could still see. "Still a secret?" Lila held out her hand. "Still a secret." Max spread his hand on the tablecloth. "Of course." "Always," said Con. Fred looked down at their 4 upturned palms. His own was still covered in burns and blisters from his last expedition, Lila's speckled with animal scratches and Con's stained with ink. Max broke the silence. "Do you think he's still there?" "I don't know," said Fred, "but I'll soon find out. I'm going back to the Amazon as soon as the rains are over, and I'm going to try and find him again." "But not to take anyone else to see it," said Con. "No," said Fred, "of course not. Just to say we survived. And just to say we kept exploring." Well, guys, that's all. Enjoy, and I'll see you soon. Have a great weekend.